ask you then, because we are talking about passion and all these things. So, who's your role model in this field?
So yeah, so with regards to role models, I mean, I try not to have role models.
Yes.
So, well, I have like there are many people whose work I follow, admire a lot. I really like how they approach certain things. But in general, I try not to have role models because I feel that that will lead to emulation, and often that. I mean, it's not to say that I will be the most original person in the world, but I mean, indirectly, you wish to emulate somebody, and when you take them up as a role model, you don't explore sort of other avenues. And so
Yeah.
in general, I try to not have role models, but again, that's just a personal thing, and I'm sure that everybody else has their role models, and it's in most cases it's a good thing. So
Yeah.
just in my case that I don't.
But maybe to like put it in a different way, like the wording, to rephrase it, I just want to know like what are the scientists, who are the scientists that you look up to? Maybe not as a role model, but still like their work has inspired you or sparked your interest in science.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So, I mean, two people I would off the cuff talk about is Barbara McClintock.
Okay.
We all know about her work with
Yes.
transposons, and actually, when she started her work, basically, we're all also aware of the amount of resistance that she got and how
Yes.
it affected her job and etc. So many other things, aspects of her life, and even till date, I think even till this year, there are papers being published that are still proving what she said was right. So. I think that basically somebody who has the mettle to basically thrash it out in this particular field, also being a woman. I'm not saying that. I mean, I don't want to keep saying that this is something special that women are able to thrash it out in the field, but this is still amazing that at that particular moment in time that she was able to do all this. So Barbara McClintock was, and her work was amazing. And the second person actually is a person who actually published just one biology paper,
Oh,
which was Alan Turing. So we all know
oh
Alan
yes.
Turing
Yeah. Okay.
for all his other scientific work, but
Yes.
he actually just published one on morphogenesis and patterning in animals, basically talking about zebras. And basically, you see all these animals around you, and you see all these patterns. So how do these patterns arise? And so he basically came up with this morphogen hypothesis and how these patterns form. And so he basically wrote this one biology paper, and I think for about 20 years, if you track the paper citation, basically it's kind of really low. And then as it comes into sort of the trend, it's sort of one of the highest cited papers
Exciting
in
one. Okay.
developmental biology. So I really like. I mean, Alan Turing is an example of a person who doesn't look at fields per se. He just picks the questions that he really likes to answer, and
Yes.
regardless of what the genre of the field is he just goes ahead trying
Yeah.
to answer it. So
And often this is the case, right? That like, I mean, science, it's not just like about biology or just about physics. It's often a mix of these that happens. Even like in our body, there's so much of biomechanics, there's so much of like physics, chemistry. It's just a mix of, even biochemistry by itself is not just pure biology. It's a mix of biology and chemistry. So
I mean, essentially, this is coming back to the systems approach point that I was talking about earlier, because I mean, we say biochemistry, biophysics, etc., but I mean, basically, things are a continuum, and things
yes,
just flow as processes. So it's just for our just to better understand things, we started reducing these into
yes, true.
sort of
Yeah.
subfields and stuff. So I think it's time that we go back to understanding things more as a continuum rather than breaking stuff down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So then do you want to just like shed a little bit light on what is it like a typical day of a PhD student? So I know that you're still a beginner in this, but still like, how does it feel like to start a PhD and what does a typical day of a first year PhD student looks like?
Yeah. So with respect to me, I spend most of my day worrying if my research question is right, if it's
Mhm.
asking the right things, etc. Because I think that if you ask the right research question, then I mean, I wouldn't say the rest of the PhD is smooth sailing per se, but if you ask the right research question, then you can better navigate yourself through
Yeah.
your PhD. And so I spend most of my day worrying about if I'm asking the right questions. But coming to the routine per se, it starts off with my morning basically doing a literature review. So I have basically a streamlined workflow where I have a bunch of people who reliably keep posting new literature and stuff, and so I follow them and etc. And I also read a lot of independent publications, and so most of the initial part of my day is literature review, and from there onwards, I basically most of the literature review is good background information, but some of them also give rise to ideas
Yes,
with respect to your field, of course. And so I make notes of things that are relevant for my work and sort of what questions I can answer, if it's worth asking that question, is it worth spending time on that question, etc. And so I take these papers, basically, I try to connect them and come up with ideas. So I start with raw literature and then put them together to come up with ideas. And then based on that ideas, I ask what sort of experiment I would need to sort of answer them.
yeah,
And then I basically design experiments, write controls and everything. What would I need to answer this particular question? And once this is done, once the design is done, I mean, ideally, I would have gone down to the lab and done some pilot experiments
yeah,
to get some ideas of to where to go and with respect to the experiment. But right now I don't have the privilege. Actually, I do have the privilege starting from tomorrow, because we are allowed to work from tomorrow. But up until today, I've just stopped at the designing of experiments and
yeah,
basically going off results that have been already published. So this is sort of my day as a whole. And of course, we have a regular sort of lab schedule, which involves doing presentations during lab meetings, having discussions. So there's sort of discussion points that we like to clarify with a broader audience with respect
yes,
to our work. So we have lab meetings to do that, and we also have the famous journal clubs.
yeah.
So we also have the journal clubs to keep us engaged with the diversity of topics out there. And so, yeah, this is basically the schedule for the day for me.
That's good to know. Yeah. Okay. And so this is a bit of like a different sort of a question. It's so what sort of a support would you seek from your friends and family who are not in the academic field, who are in non-academic fields? So
Well, to refrain from asking how much do you earn. No, I mean, all jokes aside, at least
yeah,
from my end, my parents have been super supportive. My family
yeah,
has been super supportive of this. I'm not the only one who has been in academia. My brother is in academia as well. So this is not new for my family, and
yeah.
so they've been super supportive. I mean, supportive in the sense they ask questions about what you're doing, and they force you to explain yourself, because if you can explain your work to your family, I think you really understand what you're doing. So
True. I love this point. I love this point because this is so important for
yeah.
us. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you're able to, I mean, if you can explain something in simpler terms, and then that should be the way to explain things.
Yes.
Using I mean, terms are just terms, and so
Yeah.
if you can explain sort of patterns and other things in the simplest terms possible, then that's a win-win for you as well. So in that sense, they've been super supportive. But I think in general, I think families, the broader community has to be interested. Um, I mean, they have to take a conscious vested interest in what academicians are doing in general. I think it's and the fact that they're asking the question how much you earn,
Yes.
because their expectation, or at least their presumption in their mind, is that academicians don't earn so much.
Yes.
And this is important because they're indirectly also signaling that academicians are not paid enough.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that also brings the broader point of why
Right.
are researchers not given more importance?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
This
it's
is
not an academician's fault that he doesn't get paid. So
Yeah, I mean, in fact, we work more. We work definitely more and put all our heart and soul into our work. But yes, the resulting thing in terms of money is not much. But I can surely say that in terms of reward, in terms of like when our papers get published, it's a very different sort of a feeling. I don't think it can be equalized with the amount of money.
exactly.
But still at some point of time in our lives we do want certain amount of money to live a normal life.
I mean, I think most of this stems from the fact that researchers in general are not in it for the money. So,
Yeah.
I mean, if you really want money, then that's when, people come together, lobby for
Yeah.
higher, pay
Yeah.
raise or whatever. But
Yeah.
in this case, I think researchers and most of the researchers at least are not really in it for the money, and so
Yeah.
nobody really jumps up and asks the question, why am I not getting paid more? So, I
Yeah.
think that's also sort of the problem. I mean, it's not a problem per se because I mean, researchers don't really care about
Yeah,
money.
but this is a very important point to bring forth. I mean, forward to somebody who's wanting to have a career in this,
Yeah.
and they're not sure about the financial thing. So if they really want to earn money and their focus is on money, then they should definitely look for other options from before, because this is not going to satisfy them money wise.
Yeah.
I mean, you could be independent and like satisfy your needs, but not your wants.
Yeah.
It's not sufficient for wants.
Exactly.
Not wants. All right. So this was a good point of discussion. And then, so may I know actually to how many places did you apply to before you got into this PhD? And yeah.
So I think on this front, I would count myself kind of lucky because
Okay.
so I applied only to two places.
Wow. Okay.
So the first place that I applied to was actually to a group in Switzerland. Actually, they were working basically on genome-wide association studies in again plants again, but they were
Mhm.
looking at dissecting polygenic traits, and so that was one
Okay.
topic that I actually thought I would be interested in pursuing. The other one was, as I mentioned earlier, the connection between killifish
Yeah.
and Nematostella. So, because I already worked on this particular model organism and I knew the lab well through my rotation,
Yeah.
it was sort of an easy path for me to apply there and sort of get into my PhD there, because they also had been exposed to my work ethic and also my
Mm.
interests in that particular topic, and so they were also gracious enough to have me working in their lab. So that's kind of how I got
Like
in, and so I just had
mutual.
to
Yeah.
just, yeah, it was mutual. So at least on this front, I was kind of lucky. I didn't have to apply to too many places.
That's a very good thing, because I remember how many places I applied to, and also like I think being in the continent or in the country that you're applying to is much easier than applying it from a different continent altogether.
Exactly. And so I think in this case, for the most part, I think personal impression makes a really
Yes,
important,
a lot of like,
I mean, distinction while applying,
yes,
because, I mean, if you're sitting remotely somewhere and you send mails, you can just, sit and pray that send you a reply,
yeah,
much less,
yeah. In addition, also like knowing the lab from before
exactly,
gets you a lot of like confidence,
exactly.
because once you are accepted for the position, then you go and meet the people, then somehow things won't match,
Yeah,
and many a times this happens.
yeah.
So this is another point that somebody who's applying to new universities or to new professors labs, they should keep this in mind, that if they have the opportunity, they should visit them before accepting the position.
Yeah, I mean, I was fortunate enough to work with my mentor and supervisor before, like I mentioned.
Yeah,
So
that's good. Yeah.
I sort of knew them going in, and this was super cool. So yeah.
Okay, that's perfect. Then, all right. So now, maybe just tell us, how was your first interview, PhD interview like? So you knew them before, but still, it's always a first PhD interview. So.
So I did know them, and I sort of got
Oh,
employed because of this mutual sort of
yeah.
understanding between us. But I actually had my official interview just it was I think on the 11th of April.
Okay.
So I had my interview, and in this case, basically, the people to interview, the committee that interviewed me were not my supervisor or my
Mm-hmm.
mentor, but they were people who are concerned with this particular grant that I'm going to be employed under.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so this is a doc fund grant, and so my interview committee were actually not comprised of my supervisor and my mentor,
Okay.
who had employed me, and so the interview per se. So interviews are always super helpful because they help sort of force you into molding your project, refining your questions, etc. Because you don't want to go there with really vague, I don't know, vague outlines and really dispersed experiments, and so. The interview was kind of useful in the pre-preparation, as starting from the pre-preparation, refining my questions, etc. And they also, they were experts in their particular fields, and they gave a lot of amazing feedback. I mean, what else would you like to know? I mean, specifically about the interview in general.
I mean,
You can
it
tell me.
could be also, I don't know, like the feeling when you have to, like, face the jury members. It's also about the type of questions. I mean, I think this could be a whole sort of a new
Exactly,
video.
because I mean,
Yeah, we can take it up in detail later, maybe. Yeah, but
but
just
in general, yeah, I mean,
brief.
it doesn't matter how many times you practice your presentation. When you go in front of a committee that's going to decide whether you get into the funding program or not,
Yeah,
you feel like that's one guy that's surrounded by all the Olympian giants on the aisle basically, and then they're
yeah,
looking at you and with their hammer and everything. But no, but my committee was really sweet, and
yeah,
they were they gave amazing feedback, and so at least I was fortunate on that end, and I hope I managed to convince them about the questions of my project. So yeah,
yeah.
I mean, this was the experience, like you mentioned, is something that could take a whole day discussing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Probably more than that.
Probably
But
more.
just to add on here is that PhD interviews, I mean, sometimes when we apply, like in your case, you applied to two places and you got into one, but some of us have to give a lot of interviews. So just want to mention here that if you have an opportunity to attend those interviews, just do so. Even though if you got accepted into PhD positions, make sure that you give the interview so that you practice that, because there's a lot of learning from it. You never know what sort of collaboration or network you will get into
Mhm.
even while you're giving the interview, not just about the position but the learning of from the learning perspective.
Yes, of course, and always, stage having more stage time is never a bad thing. So
Yes, yeah. That's so true. Yeah. Okay. And then there's one thing that I just wanted to ask you here, specifically with a focus on the prospective students, is what should be kept in mind while applying for a PhD position?
so I think I will start with maybe I will list things in priority. So the first
Yes.
thing uh, would be the research question.
Okay, definitely.
Yeah, because this is the most important thing. This is what sustains your motivation
Yes.
throughout your entire program, which I will also find out at the end of my 3 or 4 years or more. And
Same
so
here.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we're all hoping that this is the right question that we're asking, and that it keeps us excited toward the end. So the research question is the most important thing, and that's of course followed by, of course, the second most important thing, which is the supervisor and your mentor. So
Yeah.
your rapport with your supervisor and your mentor is crucial, and the amount of support that they can offer and the value that you add to their lab, etc. This sort of relationship is something that's very crucial. And if you have a really understanding supervisor who cuts you slack where it's necessary, and who motivates you on a daily basis with small acts and small gestures,
Yes.
that it goes a long way. And so it's sort of coming back to the previous point that we are talking about, is always visiting the labs and talking to your supervisor. So prospective PhD students, as Shaili, as you mentioned, it would be best if they have the opportunity to visit the lab, that they should talk to their supervisor, talk to their mentor, understand if they are sort of on the same wavelength as
Mhm.
personalities go, as approach to the science
Yes.
goes, and etc. And whether they're willing to accommodate your research question or not. And so this would be the second point, is the supervisor and mentor and your relationship with them. And
Mhm.
the third most important thing, of course, while really annoying, is funding.
Yes. Yeah.
So I mean, you don't want to do science being worried about whether you'll get your salary the next month or so.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, there are people who get stuck with sort of half-baked sort of funding programs, and then so they're stuck writing grants in the middle of their PhDs or something, and they're always worried about
Just a
what
lot of a
happens.
stress, a lot of a stress. Yeah.
Yes, that's a lot. That causes a lot of concern. So
Mhm.
I think it's before you start that you get the monetary aspect out of the way and ensure that your funding is taken care of, that you apply to the right grant, and
Mhm.
at least that it covers a substantial part of your project in the least. And also ensure that your funding also covers sort of other things, like for everything from conference allowances to other miscellaneous stuff. So
Yeah.
if you can apply to grants that allow you your complete freedom to do your science,
Yes.
rather than having to worry about money.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
these are
funding
sort
is very, very important because also this comes to, I think one point to highlight here is that there are different universities which give you funding in a different manner.
of.
And specifically in Europe, it's still easy because most of the times it's your supervisor who has the funding, and then you apply to them, and then you get into a PhD program. This is what the track that I have followed.
Mhm.
I don't know, Sanjay, if it was the same for you also.
Yeah.
Was it? Okay.
No,
So,
no. I mean, it was a bit different. So, I mean,
okay.
of course, you do have sort of set PhD program tracks where
Yeah.
you have a call for the position based on the funding.
Yes.
So in those cases, everything is fine. But
Yes.
you also have sort of ad hoc PhDs that also require sort of the student and the supervisor to come together and sort of apply for a grant. If you're asking sort of a niche research question that is currently not being expected by any funding body.
Yes.
So if you really want to pursue a topic and your supervisor is willing, then the chances are that you have to sit together and sort of write a grant towards getting this funding. And so, I mean, this is not for the majority of people.
Yeah.
I'm sure that if people are applying to set programs, that they don't really have to worry.
Mm.
But there are also other sort of PhD tracks where you have to, if you want to answer a really specific question that's not being funded by any sort of agency,
Mm-hmm.
uh, then you have to sort of generate the question, write a grant towards it, and convince people that they should give you money for it. And so, I mean, in my case, it was, I would say, kind of similar. The funding agency and my research question has an overlap, and so I was able to apply to it. So,
Okay.
yeah. So this is important to get money out of the way for especially these people who are doing PhDs this way.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, that's a very good point to add on because we hardly get to know about these things through websites. I mean, it's mentioned, but somewhere in one corner of the website, and you're like already so tired of like checking out so many things
Mhm.
that this thing we somehow tend to lose on. I mean, we don't take care of that so much. So, but these three are very important points. I would also go with them.
And
Yeah.
also, at least from what I hear and what I've learned so far, at least, is that being able to attract money for your research work is like an essential skill because
Yes.
as you go
That's
higher up
something
in
is not
academia,
taught. Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
taught. So at least there's not much emphasis on it. It's something that you just learn like as a part of your
Gradually.
daily life. And so
Yeah.
I think as you would also know, most of the PIs spend a lot of their time writing grants.
Yeah.
And so the ability to attract money for your research is something crucial. And so if you have the opportunity to write for grants, maybe even during your PhD, and that would be like a nice primer for what happens later. So
Yeah, yeah. And just to add on here, like in the universities, they do have a lot of courses where they teach you how to write grants because scientific writing is by itself is a skill and it's not similar to other sort of writing. So
yeah,
people who are good in writing might not be good in scientific writing and they have to learn it.
yeah,
So this is something that we should start preparing. Even though if you're not having an official grant to write, you
yeah.
can still take up like, you assume that you have to write a grant and write a dummy project a
Yeah,
grant. So this,
and it should actually this module of research methodology, scientific writing, etc. At least I feel I would have benefited far more if this had started all the way from my bachelor's.
yes, yeah,
So if there was a
yeah,
separate module for this would have helped a lot actually.
yeah,
Because yeah, I mean, scientific writing is something that I would even push all the way back to school. That people need to understand how to do this, and so
yeah.
yeah, I mean, the
Maybe
earlier the
from
better.
after 10th grade, like if people choosing science field, like if they don't want to go into medical sciences, they don't want to be physicians, doctors, MDs, then this should be a module. That is so true. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, that's a very good point here. Mm, all right. And then, so like just let us know. So who should do a PhD? Like what are the prerequisites or what is something that a person should have to decide for themselves that they should do a PhD?
Yes, so again, on this particular question, I feel a little, I feel like I'm falling short here to answer this particular
Okay.
question. In a sense, because I haven't completed my PhD, so I don't really know if the qualities that I'm sort of, betting on is something that would carry me through the PhD as well.
Yeah, it's a very
Uh,
certain thing. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but to sort of extrapolate on at least the qualities that I feel that we should follow in general if you're in science, because if you have some integrity in science, it doesn't matter. I mean, whether you're doing a master's or a
Which
PhD,
degree
you
you
should
are
be able to
doing? Yeah, yeah.
weather it. So, I think the two most important things that at least I have learned from multiple people who have taught me this. Um, the first thing is basically your authenticity. So, are you really being authentic about the question that you want to answer? I mean, sure. I mean, you look at multiple questions and you see a lot of people saying, superficially that, oh, this is amazing and this is cool, but really deep down, do you want to really answer this question? And this is something that you have to ask yourself before you start, because often people's questions are also biased by trends. And so let's say there's a huge community that's working on one particular thing, and everything that they do looks cool and looks quite amazing. And so you sort of thinking that this is really a cool field. I know I want to answer questions in there, but once you get into that, you discover that personally that you're not really into that question. So I think you have to be authentic about whether this is really a question that you deep down want to answer. That's sort of the first point. And the second point, which is the most important point, at least in my opinion, is learning to say I don't know.
Yeah, we don't know a lot. Like I guess 90% of it is
Exactly.
just yeah.
I mean, the just the quality of being able to say I don't know means that there is your possibility of exploring the
Learning.
topic and learning it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I think that being able to say I don't know is something that I also learned even more recently through my master's thesis. I had an amazing mentor who taught me this. So sometimes we think we know. It's not a fault of our own. We just think that we know, but later people just make you realize that you didn't really know it. So, so it's important that you spend time to address the fact that you're able to define what you know and what you don't, and then you go from what you know from what you know to what you don't. And so
Yeah.
these two qualities I think are translatable to your PhD as well, but I think I will find out in 3 to 4 years time.
Yeah, I really like both the points. They are like I'm also in the beginning, so I also can't decide on these. But as you mentioned that in the scientific work, this is so important. And also accepting that you don't know something is really, really important. Being aware of the fact that you don't know it is really important. And this
Yes.
gives also like a honesty, like a honest answer to your supervisor
Yeah.
that you know for yourself what you know, what you don't know, and then they will know what they should teach you. So
Teach you
it
exactly.
creates a clear understanding between you and your supervisor.
I
Yeah.
mean, there are always people around you with huge loads of expertise on whatever
Hmm.
topic you're working on, and so you just I mean, you're safe as long as you're able to tell them, like you said, what you don't know. But also a third point regarding this is
Hmm.
at least based on my conversations with multiple PhD students first year as well as last year,
Yeah.
the PhD is actually the degree itself appears to be given for the ability to weather obstacles.
Yes.
It's not really a question of it's not just a question of taking generating a research question, following it up and answering,
Yeah.
but you also have a lot of everything starting from administrative to scientific obstacles that you have to overcome through this entire program. And I think just the quality of being able to weather these obstacles appears to be something really unique to a PhD. And so at least I think,
Hmm.
again, this is just me thinking that it could be a point that so it's a quality that somebody needs to have when they do a PhD, is the
Yeah.
ability to basically just weather obstacles.
Yeah, this is very true. Yeah, just want to add on here that usually, with in case like from a non-academy missions perspective, they think that PhD is a like a very top-notch degree and it demands a lot of effort. You need to be very smart and all these aspects. But from an academic point of view, this is the beginning of our career, and this is the time when we have the time to learn,
Mhm.
because once we enter into another degree called postdoc, then we will basically have to supervise people, and that's when we will still continue to learn, but the possibility of us learning from others or others teaching us gets reduced somehow. So it is a very different perspective based on who's looking at it. So from our perspective, we are still taking baby steps and we are
Mhm.
still newbies in this field. So this is something that we should keep in mind as academicians, that we have to, learn as much as possible in this PhD. It's not about solving this research question only, but to learn different things. It could be public speaking, reaching out to people, as you mentioned, simplifying things and reaching out to people. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to sort of summarize what you said, it's
Yeah.
basically a personal process.
Yes.
I mean, it's a really personal process, and not only do you learn on the scientific front, but you also learn more about yourself.
Yourself,
Uh,
true. Yeah. Yeah.
you basically learn what your qualities are, what you can weather, and what you can't. So
Yeah.
I think on that front, maybe it's quite useful. But yeah, at least for me, my personal motivation of doing a PhD, like I mentioned earlier, was not for the degree itself. It was just for the framework of being able to answer questions. So
Mm.
I think I will find out if I can really weather obstacles or not, just like
Yeah,
everybody else.
we'll find it out. Yeah, we are on the like similar same journey. Yeah.
Mm.
Just to add, ask another question here, because we are discussing about PhD and life in general. So, what is your take on mental health and PhD? Because this is one topic that also PhDs discuss about, but there are a lot of things that we don't tend to discuss in this aspect also. So, what is something that you want to talk about in this?
So in general, the one positive trend I think I observe is the fact that institutions have more mental health counselors,
Yes, that's true.
which is crucial, I think, because people take up too much stress. And I think this is true, especially in sort of people who are working in medical sciences, for example, where you have implications on other people's lives. For example,
Yeah.
you really have to, which is what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Yeah.
I can completely understand. Your source of stress is translatable because its implications are going to be seen. It's really evident.
Yes.
I mean, not to say that other PhD topics are not evident, but I mean, it's a little bit more subtle. It's not like
Yeah. Hmm.
people who are working in the medical sciences. So I think that it's important, this trend of increasing mental health counselors in institutions to have conversations, basically, to have regular conversations with people in general. It doesn't have to be a counselor. It's just important to talk with the larger community. Especially, I think Twitter is quite useful on this front because there
Yes.
are huge communities that are. I mean, you can call it ranting or lamenting or whatever it is, but
Yeah,
you
but
have
we need to let it out somehow.
you
Yeah.
need to vent it out. And so I think there are communities that basically support you through this, and there are always people to pick you up and dust you off when you really need it. And so it's important that you identify groups or avenues that also empower you in this sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also the most important thing is to also reinforce the fact that every time we get up, your PhD is again just part of your life.
Your life. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. It's
I
not
mean,
who you are.
it's
Yeah.
not who you are. It's and you tend to get absorbed into it. Again, I don't know. I have just started, so I can't really comment on this per se. But I hear that people who are well into their PhDs are so absorbed into this their topics and their experiments, etc., that they completely lose out on their peripheral vision per se.
Yeah.
So I think that it's important to tell yourself every day that it's a fresh day. Number one,
Yeah.
and that your mistakes of yesterday don't carry forth today, and it's important to deal with every day as a new one.
Mhm.
And also the fact that basically you tell yourself every day that your PhD is just part of your life, and you always surround yourself with other activities. It's cliche, but it's true that your hobbies really help you out.
Yes. Yeah.
It's always important to have multiple hobbies. It's important to indulge yourself with your friends in multiple activities. And um, right now it might be a little hard, but I mean,
Yeah. We don't
optimistically,
recommend it at this moment, but
we don't.
probably virtual things, yeah, could be used.
And if
Yeah.
you are indulging in activities, social distancing is important. So
Yes. Yeah.
maintain your social distancing and not more than 10 people in a group. So, but
I would
yeah,
say
so
five also.
yeah, 10 is too much already. So
Yeah.
I think it's important, yeah, just that you remind yourself that you,
Yeah.
you're not your PhD.
Yeah.
So have this broader perspective of life and keep
Hmm.
yourself happy, basically.
Yeah.
I
And
mean,
I just
to be honest, there's no
yeah.
reason to be sad.
That's true. Yeah. I just want to add on here one thing, which, like, while talking to you, also came in my mind,
Mhm.
is that the whole point of reaching out, Twitter is one good option, but also that often like we know people who are also doing PhD. So it's good to know that we are in this journey together, and it's not only that it's happening to me. So the question of why me, that only troubles you when you only see yourself being put up in that scenario. But when you see others suffering also, I mean, it could be a very different way to approach the situation, but then you know that, you know, others are also in that situation. And then you can talk to them and find out how they are dealing with it. And yeah, renting also helps. I mean, it does, because you're
It is.
letting out your emotions, and you don't have to control your emotions.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, venting is always cathartic as experiences, but also also the general idea that your environment is not under your control.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
everything outside of you is completely not under your control, and then
Yeah. But how we respond to it is under our control.
absolutely.
So it then also comes back to the hobbies, and also what sort of self-care are you following? What are your principles of life that you want to stick with? And that literally takes you a long way in your career. It's not just about, and then it comes with the well-being and mental health and integrating different practices that can keep you grounded. Yeah, it could be
And I
also
think
into sports or whatever. Yeah.
exactly. I mean, it also appears that most of the stress that I've observed in other people seems to come from the fact that they try to control or manage situations uh, which are really hard to control. I mean,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
have so many confounding variables that are all, you're surrounded by all these variables, and you try to you try really hard to control every single aspect of it, and it's not going to work.
Yeah.
It's bound to fail. So you're going to reach a threshold at some point where you just can't you know manage your day the way you want. So I think as you rightly mentioned, it's basically everything is in how you respond to
Yeah.
your external situations. And if you're really rooted to who you are and what you want to do, then your response will always be a joy for you. So,
Yeah.
and most importantly, you have the opportunity. I mean, you're being paid to answer a question that you really like to answer, and so
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
that you remind yourself that every day and sort of go with it. I mean, but again, it's still early days for me. But in general, at least from what I've observed from people around me and in communities, it's important that you
Yeah.
remind yourself this every day.
Yeah, it's actually important to overcome this stigma, because there's a lot of fear associated with it. And I mean, I'm sure we will also be put into that thing once in our PhD, because there are so many factors that we have to deal with, and there are so many things that we have to do as a PhD student. We have to teach students. There are specific amount of hours that we literally have to teach, and we are not paid for that. And then we have to manage our own projects, have to look for our living. I mean, pay electricity bills, do all those things. So it's a lot. We have to pass exams, face PhD committee meetings, and submit reports. There are like whole host of things that we have to do. Literally can't
Gee,
count them on fingertips.
I'm already anxious now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for me it's been a bit different, because I had to apply for ethical clearance, and I am doing drug trials in human beings. So I can relate to the part of thinking the fact that how your actions how you should be responsible for your actions and your decisions on others, because these will be the individuals who will be taking the drugs for weeks. And you literally have to be sure about what. So that right research question, asking a right research question, is such an important aspect. And this is not just for PhD, but for anybody who's interested into scientific work. Yeah. Well, yeah, a very good point there. Yeah. um, I guess we were talking about hobbies. So what are the things that you do in your free time when you're not thinking about your research question, not doing your PhD?
Uh, so for me, most of my day, I mean, for those of you who don't know, I'm also a violinist. So I learned Indian classical violin for an extended period of time during the earlier sort of period. And I mean, right now I don't go to classes anymore, which I would really like to continue at some point.
Yeah,
But having learned for, I think, close to, I don't know, close to a decade or so,
that's a long time, but also
it's a
train
long
your
time.
brain. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they what they say is absolutely right about, I mean, learning an instrument and giving you sort of molding your brain in the in sort of the right direction, etc. So the influence of learning arts in general, creative endeavors,
Yes.
etc. always are important for you. So violin has sort of played that role in that creative sort of fulcrum for me. So I also sort of went from playing the violin to also composing songs, and so
Wow. Yeah. I
more.
actually have seen your YouTube channel on that. Do you want to
Yeah,
like mention about that?
yeah. Oh, I have a YouTube channel. So I have only one YouTube channel, and that entire YouTube channel is just me exploring, um, uh, basically composing different genres, and basically I have a mood every day, and I sort of use that mood to compose songs. And so this is just some stress buster for me. And
Yeah.
so I just like composing music, and regardless of whether people like it or not, I spend the days listening to my own compositions, and I feel really proud of it. And so,
That's good. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds really petty, but I mean,
No, I mean, I can totally relate to this because I'm a lot into drawing.
yeah,
So, the same thing, the mood thing. So sometimes I just scribble and make doodles based on how I'm feeling.
yeah.
So I sometimes also make mandalas and then explore colors based on my moods.
And I've seen
So
those as well. Yeah,
yeah, so like it is just a way of letting out your emotions in the form of creativity, which is
exactly.
very good. Which is very good. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, this is just perfect. So I mean, everything from drawing to playing music to playing instruments to composing songs and all these are all stress busters for all of us. I think this is actually a stress buster that's more commonly found actually.
Mhm.
Music and drawing is actually something that's very broadly, if you ask, I think 9 out of 10 people would give you this answer, and so it has a huge influence on
Mhm.
sort of how relieving stress. And also, um, I like cooking a lot. Um, I mean, I've been doing this since I was a kid. I always used to enter my mom's kitchen when she's not around and start cooking stuff, and uh,
Okay.
always get reprimanded for it later on. But then I think at some point she realized that I wasn't doing such a bad job, as long as I cleaned up after I finished. So
Oh, yeah,
so
that's what matters to moms.
that's always important, that you leave a clean workspace, which also translates to your lab bench actually.
True. Yeah. That
Cooking
is
is
so
not
good. Yeah.
so different from experimental
Mm.
work, and so
Yeah.
if you can be organized in your cooking, then I mean, it's a fair assumption to make that you'll
Yeah,
be
there's a
organized
lot
in your
of
emotions.
parallel things between cooking and scientific experimentation, which I also understood,
Yeah,
yeah, over the period of time because I was not at all interested in cooking, but during this quarantine and also before, because I was made to cook for myself, I just wanted to like, just explore different ingredients and mix things. And so the scientific aspect of me made me interested into the cooking thing.
yeah.
So it has a lot of overlap, which is yeah, you're very right on that.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean that just because you have a clean kitchen that you have a clean lamp bench, but
Yeah.
but
Yeah, and
but
there's like more of a sanitation that you need there. Like, I mean, if you're dealing with blood samples and yeah.
exactly. So I mean, cooking is something that I do to stress bust as well. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's most of my day actually just goes into composing songs, playing some violin, listening to music, and of course,
Yeah.
cooking as well. Uh, but the rest of the day per se is also I just leave it because I wake up and then maybe I have a completely different idea. So I try not to stick to a routine on a daily basis,
Okay.
with respect to this at least. Maybe one day I just want to go for some adventure trips or something. I don't know. I just come up with random stuff on a daily basis, and so
Yeah.
I do. Most of my time goes off in this actually. Yeah.
Yeah, there has
Uh,
to be like some change also because then this life gets a bit monotonous.
yeah.
So probably that's how we are bringing up change.
Yeah, and it's also something queer is something that I've recently started doing is following science journalists actually.
Hmm.
So this is something that is crucial at this point in time, and so I'm starting to read excerpts from multiple science journalists, and trying to sort of see if they're accurately representing what's happening in the field, etc.
Yeah.
Would I call this a hobby? I mean, I would actually, because I sort of do it in my spare time, and so
Hmm.
uh, I follow a lot of science journalists these days, and I think I think it's important that we have more science journalists coming out, because they sort of represent the communication between what's happening in academia versus what the public think. And so this translation needs to be very important. And so I think, I think this is one hobby that people all need to start doing, is people need to start reading more authentic science journalist material, rather than
true, rather than the fake news. And this is the need of the hour. This is so important. This is so important for us to realize that the news that we got should be circulated based on how authentic it is. First, to make sure that it is coming from an authentic source, and and also to justify for ourselves if it was something that made impact on us, or should we just like forward it for just the sake of forwarding it to people. So thanks for bringing this up. I mean, this is not something specific for PhDs, but I think for all the people who are watching this.
I mean, also I think editorials in general, I think the sort of the thing that they do is, most of the editorials are in general editorials that converse with people in science, and then they try to translate and sort of interpret what's being said, and they share the message. But you also have to know that there are people with a scientific background who also do journalism, and so this is crucial.
And this is important also because I mean, maybe like for kids, actually they have like a lot of websites when kids can start doing it from a very early age, so that as they grow up they can like this just comes without any extra effort.
I mean, could you share some examples maybe of this?
I don't remember as of now, but maybe I can try to find those links. But I mean, there are a lot of options that I sometimes see when I don't understand something. I go to those kids' website and I mean, read it. There's no harm in it because they are more simplified. And sometimes you also don't want to use so much of your mental faculty because you're already tired of reading so many research articles. So you want to read something very light, but still sciencey. So just it's a very good connection because your hobby, the third hobby that you mentioned, matches a lot with the last question of today's interview, which is, what is the one message that you want to share with the people who are watching this video?
So I mean, for most of you who are active on social media, you would know there's this message going around that every time there is a crisis situation, that people turn to arts and culture for entertainment, and people turn to scientists for solutions. And so I think this sort of highlights the most important point, which is these are essential to sort of human beings' lifestyles. And so you need people who do active research and try to find solutions to your daily problems. And every single every single thing that you do as a part of your daily life, and every single object that you're in contact with, is basically something that has risen out of somebody doing research and basically somebody doing some amazing work. And so I think that it's thanks to capitalism and a bunch of other things, I think we've sort of become insensitive to the fact that we're surrounded by amazing things. And so all this did not appear magically. People actually had to study and research it, and things came out of that. And so I think it's important that we realize that these two things are very crucial, and that the public should be more invested basically in what happens in academia in general. I think that when you see a conversation between an academic and a non-academic, you can see that the academic is always interested in what the non-academic has to do. The non-academic usually superficially listens to what the academic has to say, but most of it goes into a black box because they assume that they cannot understand it. So I think this lack of communication here is basically as a result of problems on both ends. So the public are not in general taking a conscious effort to invest their time in understanding these things, and at the same time researchers I feel most of them have given up. They just talk within their circle, within their community, and they're quite happy with growing their science in that front. But at the end of the day, you're doing your science so that you can also share it with the broader audience. And so starting from everything from your publications, because I mean, if I took a paper from the field that you're working on, it's highly likely that I won't understand most of it. And I think it's important that you always write even your publications to a broader audience, and it's important that that researchers always have, or segregate a particular period of time during the day where they converse with the public, either as an individual or as a group.
Yeah.
The government has press conferences. Cricket teams have press conferences. Why can't scientists?
Yes.
So, I mean, it's important that you always regularly engage with the public on the advancements that are happening in the field. So this is a two-way street. And so the most important thing is, so the public, especially in India, especially, I know one of the greatest investments the public's basically making is, in movies or in cricket or things like that, and that's where you inevitably find most of the investments go.
Yeah.
So whether it's private investment or public investment goes where public wants it to go inevitably. And so if
Yes,
the
and that's where
public
the
is
funding. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, exactly. So I mean, if the public is interested in something, that's where the money goes. And so I urge the public, including you and me, that we should all be heavily invested in this, so that this entire sector is re-energized, both in terms of motivation as well as in terms of financial needs. And so this pandemic has basically set that perspective, at least for me. And I think that it's important that the public take more interest in what's happening in academia in general.
I completely agree because I've been also thinking on the same lines. I mean, I'm not too sure much with the investment part of it because I don't have much knowledge on that, to be frank. But in general, also, so when I studied in Germany, I did see people having like those Wissenschaft. I don't know what's the complete expansion in German,
Yeah.
but they did have like those fests
Yeah.
where they had like doctors and all the research scientists making their the experiments, reaching out to the public, explaining them
Yeah.
properly. Also, I know about a group in I guess they're based in UK. They have this brain awareness group. I did apply for some projects there too. So there are a lot of things that are happening, but they're taking place in a small groups. And as like per se, I mean, I'm not sure what's happening in India much. So yes, this is something that also as scientists we also have to think about, that just not about PhD, but in our free time, maybe we can develop such projects or write a small article about our own research, which could be shown to the public or make a video to reach out to people. And yeah.
And what's really positive is, I mean, you're an example of this. Somebody who's doing your PhD, but you're also trying to sort of shed awareness on people's works. And so I
Yeah.
think there's also an increase in number of scientists who are also blogging,
Yes,
and
a lot
also
of
scientists
them.
who
A
are
lot.
blogging.
Yeah, they're on Instagram. Like, I mean, if you're following a lot of them on Instagram,
Yeah.
apart from Twitter, they have also taken the platform of Instagram, because a lot
Yeah.
of people follow Instagram just for pictures. But then these scientists are also showing that they are not just scientists, but they have other things to do. They have other hobbies,
Yeah.
and they are communicating science through different ways. That I know, like there's one girl, she uses makeup art to depict science.
Yeah.
And there are so many of those who are yeah, taking it up very seriously and doing a very good job. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just for example, I mean, there are a lot of people who go beyond, just taking pictures of themselves with lab coats and pipettes, and
Yes.
saying, "Hey, I'm sciencing away." But
Yes.
there are some people who go into the actual details of what's happening.
Yeah.
Then again, this is actually a work in progress, because in the current climate, this is the first time that such a large number of people are actually trying to reach out and explain their positions.
Yes.
and
Yeah.
and so I think that it will take some time before a balance is found where the public is comfortable with being able to understand these things, and the scientists are also well versed in communicating these things. And
Yes.
we are actually part of this sort of generation that's sort of creating this trend. And so I think that everybody who's, whether you're doing your master's or your PhD or even your bachelor's for that matter, you should early on start engaging with people about your work, and try to attend a lot of public awareness events and etc. So
Mhm.
this is important.
Yeah, this is very important, especially like I think reaching out to schools
Mhm.
and talking to like your, I think just talking to your school juniors, you could reach out to at least 100 of them. So one person reaching out to 100 people is still a lot in our lifetime. So
I
yeah.
mean, I mean, thanks for talking to you. There's one example that does come to mind actually. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this. So there's this thing called Foldscope.
Okay.
It's basically a cardboard microscope that there's this company that makes. there's a team that makes this thing called the Foldscope, and it's basically very cheap. I think it must be under 10 rupees or something
All right.
per
Oh,
cup or
okay.
microscope. And they actually managed to produce huge number of these Foldscopes, and they send it to schools across the nation. And this is happening in India. And so
Mm.
I see so many kids that are being inspired to sort of understand what's happening in the world around them through such a simple tool. Because
Yes.
it's so affordable, and the schools are
Yeah.
able to buy them in large quantities. And so, at least everywhere on social media, I find like all these kids posting pictures of ants, everything from ants to onion peels to, I don't know,
Yeah,
basically.
and that's how the scientist in you is born,
Exactly.
because it's only through these things that you realize that you're curious, and that's how we also, I think, somehow realized that we were curious about science.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just to, I think, just to end here, but with a experience of mine, which I just get reminded of because we were talking about this. So 3 years ago, I had the opportunity to meet village students near my hometown, because they had invited us to conduct a session on meditation and
Mm.
also on educating them about science, because they are the group of children who are living in villages. Their
Mm.
parents have a very different scenario because they themselves have not studied at all, and the government is actually paying them to send their kids to the schools.
Wow.
So it's a very different situation. We've not been into those situations. So it was an eye-opening moment for me when I met those kids. For one thing, I didn't know how to interact with them, because the way I wanted to communicate science with them was getting too complicated. So, but there is always a way through which you can connect with people.
Yeah.
So they just asked me, where are you coming from? And then I just told them about, like, I drew a map of the world and showed them that, I'm coming from there. And then they had questions about geography. So in that way, I taught them, like, about the continents, about the oceans.
Yeah.
So there are so many different ways in which we can connect with the people, but it's important to realize what their needs are. And especially in India, we have like this huge group of kids who are so curious, but they have so much of a limitation in their families that they are stopped from learning. Education is not that accessible to them. So
Mm.
we have to, like, take efforts to do certain acts if given an opportunity, or by ourselves, to meet such people. Maybe just meeting them, us meeting them, could inspire them. Because I remember, like, by the end of the talk, they wanted me to stay back for longer, and they were asking me in Hindi that, when are you going to come back? And that literally, like, brought tears in my eyes, because it was such a pure yeah, it was such an innocent moment. So yeah.
And I think the benefit for them aside, I think the most important thing, which it's really cool that they are being paid to go to school. I had absolutely no idea, and I think this is also a trend where a lot of schools are also offering free meals.
Yes, free
I
meals.
think you
Yeah,
should be
yeah,
aware there are so many universities
yeah,
and schools that offer free meals, and to sort of rope in the tribal population because they don't really have the money to eat. So
yeah,
if you provide them meals, they come. This happens also in my state in Tamil Nadu, and so
yeah.
we have the noon meal scheme and all these wonderful schemes. But also the fact that upon meeting them, uh, you also know what unadulterated curiosity is, because
Yes,
this is something that you started off with or I started off with, and I always get the sense that this is being diluted as I go forward, because
yes.
I don't know why. I mean, it's not something that I can really specifically point out to certain things that's causing this, but as time progresses, it feels like your curiosity sort of gets diluted, and when you
That
look
is
at them,
so
you
true.
sort of.
No, I agree, because we start forgetting the why of why we started, and
Yeah.
also then we start getting influenced by things around us, like also the social pressure, like our friends getting married, they are getting kids. I mean, these things seem kind of normal for others, but it is a pressure for a PhD student
Yeah.
or somebody who's in a scientific community, even for women in general, because by the time they come to a tenure position, they are also expected to be pregnant, and these things, like a woman's body, how much can she bear?
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot
This is
to,
this is this is crucial. I mean, but on the women's front, this is also being hopefully addressed, at least from the
yes.
conversations that I see that are happening.
Mhm.
That this is happening, and where there where the women are not being given the right amount of space, they are also coming out confidently and calling the authorities out. So I
Yes.
think that this is very important that people have an open conversation about it.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, concerning the kids as well. I mean, uh, I would really give anything to have that. I mean, this really carefree curiosity. I mean, they
Yeah.
look at everything, and for them, everything is the same. It's like everything is equally exciting. And the problem is, as we sort of start specializing in particular topics, there's an expectation that you stick to that topic and basically sort of
Yeah.
become an expert in that topic or whatever. But I think your childlike curiosity is actually the exact opposite. Your childlike curiosity wants to explore a lot of
A
things,
lot. Yeah. There's no
and
boundaries to it. Yeah.
there's no boundaries. And so I think later on that sort of causes some friction maybe. I don't know, I'm just extrapolating. I'm
Yeah,
thinking
we
that,
are all reflecting here because
yeah,
there's no right or wrong answer here. It's just based on our experiences, our reflections, our introspections, based on the experiences that we have gone through, the our observations. Yeah,
exactly. And
yeah,
so I mean, you becoming an expert at something should not incapacitate you to understand other things. And so
yes.
I think that looking at, I mean, meeting kids in general always gives me the feeling that I
Kind
should
of,
always
yeah,
be.
it sparks that thing again in you. It's just like a lighting the. It's like a light. It's basically like lighting the candle again. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, to be honest, we are still kids in in
yeah,
our career trajectory, but
yeah,
I mean, at least age-wise, they have this sort of childlike curiosity. I think that we should retain, or
yeah,
should try to retain throughout the entirety of our career. Yeah.
yeah. All right. So this brings us to the end of the interview. And personally, I think it was a great interview because I got to learn a lot. And thanks for sharing your
Not at all.
insight.
I mean, thanks
Yeah.
for the opportunity. I mean, just let me know if something I said wasn't clear. I'm always available to clarify. So
Yes, yeah, this is to the audience that if you want to reach out to us for any questions, feel free. You can comment below any of your questions, or if you want us to do a live session, then we will be up for it, just depending on the feedback. So,
yeah,
thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Thank you, Sanjay. It was
no,
nice
thank
meeting
you.
you through a Skype call.
Yeah,
And
yes,
yeah,
likewise.
yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, ciao.